Hey, friends, welcome to Real Life Conversations for Christian Coaches. I'm your host, Teresa McCloy.
And I'm your co host, Erica Vinson. We are so glad that you're listening in. Here on the podcast each week, we want to have real conversations to help you grow successful and sustainable coaching businesses and yet still stay grounded to what truly matters.
Each and every week, we come to share practical tools, honest stories, and our own experience as coaches, as well as inviting some great guests like we have today to come on the show and support you to live from a place of rest, not rush.
So, whether you're just getting started or you have been coaching for years, you're in the right place. Well, as Teresa already mentioned, we do have a great guest today. And we have such a God wink of a story in the way that we met back in 2019. Teresa and I were sitting in a living room in an Airbnb in Marshall, Michigan, anticipating an Enneagram training that we were about to embark on. And we knew that there was one more roommate that was arriving that was staying at the Airbnb. And I remember anticipating and just staying up. And I remember the moment that the suitcase came through the door and, hey, y'all. And it was Elizabeth Simmons. And I had no idea the friendship God would form and the connections that he would make, but I'm sure glad we stayed up. So, Elizabeth Simmons, we are so grateful to have you today on the podcast, friend.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
It has been a journey for sure. And the three of us have connected in so many different ways, from being in one another's homes to doing training together. Elizabeth actually went on after that Enneagram training. We all stayed connected. She has gone on to be one of our original beta members when we launched our certification for coaching and said yes. And her husband, Cameron, have been to more of our retreats and in person gatherings than anyone else probably has been. Part of the reason being, we've actually hosted a couple of those in Texas with you and Cameron. So it is high time that you came on the podcast and talked about what's the work God's been doing in you and what are you doing now and just some of your journey in both coaching and ministry. So we're excited about the conversation, friend.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here for sure.
We've got lots to talk about. But let's kind of go back to after 2019. We're going to go back in the story a little bit and just talk about where were you even as you came to that event? You had found the tool of the Enneagram. That was kind of some of the work that you felt God had for you then. But what are other doors, even from that time forward, that began to open for you through that journey?
Well, the Enneagram was brand new to me and I fell in love with it. And I had never heard of it. And coming from Texas, I was like, the Ennea what? And so Enneagram, what? And I knew that I wanted to be certified so I could teach it. And I wanted to be certified through Christian leadership. And I found Claire Lowridge, who then I found y'all at that training, just kind of started there. I had never heard of anything like the Enneagram. I had never heard of using something other than what you typically talked about in church with the Bible and spiritual practices to help formation. I had never thought of doing anything different because I didn't know anything different. So that was really kind of
Yes.
the first thing that launched me in and got me connected with y'all.
And we were all kind of there, to be honest. Eric and I were coming out of ministry space, as you and Cameron also have a background in that space back in that time. What was going on in you that drew you there?
At the time, my husband had been in vocational ministry. Cameron had been in vocational ministry for 20 plus years. And I had been involved, but about the previous 10 years, I really had not been very involved. I was tending church, but I wasn't really serving there. And when I found the Enneagram, it really kind of launched me into a new growth pattern, a spiritual growth. It just, so even though I wasn't serving within the church, I was attending, like I said, but I wasn't serving. I was still growing suddenly in a new way.
That growth trajectory has been consistent in your journey, and you were doing some mentoring even with girls, a young lady at Baylor. Shout out to the Bears, right? And
I knew you guys would work that in somehow. I knew that would
I'm
come
an
in.
honorary Bear fan because
That's
of
right.
the Simmons family. But because of that mentoring, and then even the Enneagram opened some new pathways for you to even lean into coaching. And then from there, you mentioned like there's been some shifts even yet that have moved you from coaching to actually full circle back even to some women's ministry. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, share just a little bit about that transition for you.
Well, I have to give credit to the Real Life Process. Being involved with the coaches of the Real Life Process opened me up to more conversations about spiritual things that I really wasn't aware of, more spiritual practices. And I'm telling you, do my math, since 2019, joining y'all, my spiritual growth has exponentially expanded because of what I've been learning through the Real Life Process and through the coaches that attend and are there for retreats and the conversations that we have. And I had never considered being a women's minister. I think you mentioned that earlier, that's what I'm doing now. I had never considered it. It just wasn't a draw for me. And I honestly had this conversation with someone at our church who said, we're looking for leadership within the women's ministry. And I probably smiled nicely and said, oh, okay. And inside I'm like, no, not going to go there. And was woken up a few weeks later at about 4 a.m. on a Thursday morning. I can remember it very clearly. And the Lord really saying, Elizabeth, you can take what you've been doing outside of the church walls. At the time I was coaching to and using the Real Life Process with real estate agents and businesses here in Waco. And the Lord just kind of said, everything that you're doing outside of the walls of the church can be done right here in the church walls. For the first time, I kind of cursed it. I didn't curse at God, but I was kind of like, I don't want to do that. Ran from it. And then eventually felt like, okay, I have to be obedient to this calling, and really haven't looked back. I've loved every minute out of it. And I've been able to use the Real Life Process in the ministry in some really exciting ways.
You've mentioned the process. And for a listener, maybe that's just tuning in for the first time and hearing us talk about that, what are some really tangible things for you, Elizabeth, that were that transforming piece, that offered you that formation that then led you into where you are? What would you name about the process?
Well, obviously starting to pay attention not only to the doing, but the being part. I definitely, that's where I was in all of this. I was paying attention to the being more and more over the years since starting the Real Life Process, and just understanding that the doing is valid. The doing part of my life is important and worthy, but at the same time, I've got to pay attention to the being. So that was really the transition for me. And then starting to use the maps, doing some deep dives with that, the needs and values, of course, the Enneagram, like I said, just doing the process itself.
Thank you for sharing your story. Just that journey, because the journey began in you and your desire to go deeper, the desire to be formed. Much of the work that we do as we listen to others is walking a journey with them as they're being formed. And we all are being formed, whether we want to say we are or not. And that's where the process really that you're talking about, the tool of the Real Life Process, which has 4 components to it. Some of it's around your being, some of it's around your doing. It could be just another tool, but it's not, because it's a formation process. And you had a desire that was stirring in you of, well, I found this tool, happened to be the Enneagram, and that invited me into some more knowing of myself. If someone were listening in and saying, yeah, I have a desire for more formation, and not just around the process or the Enneagram, but what would you even say to them as a person that was saying, I feel this? What
Mhm.
might you say to someone who's feeling that nudge for some more formation to happen in their life? Anything come to mind?
Well, I think I would just say, yay. I mean, that sounds so simple, but I would be excited for them. And I would say, lean into that, explore that, find people who are already ahead of you in that journey, who are growing themselves, both emotionally and spiritually. Get a mentor, no matter what your age, find someone ahead of you. I think it's so much easier to grow in community. We're called to grow in community. We look at the Lord, the triune God, is in community. So,
Mm.
Yeah. When you were sitting in that place, Elizabeth, of true discernment around the Thursday morning, 4 a.m. piece, what did you pull forward from that that was like, okay, God, you're calling me to this? What maybe helped you navigate? Because I think that's one of the beauty of having a rule of life, which is really what the process is it is when we come to those big discernments of what am I saying yes and what am I saying no to? What have I already named? What did you lean into in that time period of discernment?
well, I mean, I have to say again, I ran from it initially. It was not something that I wanted to even attempt to discern, to be very honest and confessional about it. Leaning into my needs and values, that helped me to understand. And I think that some of those needs were not even being met because I wasn't doing what I was really supposed to be doing.
So you've talked a little bit about community. How did community or coaches or mentors come into that discernment process for you?
Well, obviously, just as far as community goes, I have a community right here locally in my own neighborhood. And of course, talking with them was important and they were helpful. But having good questions from the coaches, I believe, helped me to continue to do the discerning that I needed to do. Good questions from good coaches who weren't trying to answer for me or tell me what they thought I should do, but
Mhm.
just help me to explore it and into it.
Yeah, what a gift to have that companion for yourself in navigating it. And now you are using it and actually using the process with women at your church. And so, what does it look like for you to sit in that seat and be the one who's often asking good questions, is doing the listening, and is really that companion for others?
You know, it's interesting because I feel like when the women come to me in ministry, they are looking for me to advise them. They're looking for me to tell them what they should do. And I can't. I shouldn't be doing that. I should be exactly like I've been taught through Real Life Process and through our calls that we have weekly, to ask good questions, to explore who they are, how God wired them. What does that look like for them? Finding out their needs and values just by
Mhm.
asking good questions.
I had the opportunity last year, I think it was a year ago, to come down and be with you in a retreat that we led. It probably has been
Mhm.
almost 2 years ago that you've been sitting in the space. And I remember with the women that we had there, just watching them come to life around something that felt practical for them.
Elizabeth, as you think about what this looks like practically, what are some of the things that the women experience in the ministry space with you?
Well, I have had a great deal of fun using all of the tools from the real life process. I've walked through the real life process with them. I tweaked it just a little bit, which I love that Teresa allows us to do that, but I tweaked it just a little bit in adding a little more into the spiritual practices into that, but we walked through the whole process. And I've had women send me pictures of their process, a year later. I've taught them maps. I've used them individually, one at a time. And I've also taught them as the whole package for a course. I use needs and values often with large groups. I love using needs and values. My husband and I do premarital counseling. So we use the needs and values in premarital counseling. We have gone in with our pastor and his wife on a marriage course, and we were able to use the needs and values then. Of course, the Enneagram, I've done Enneagram workshops. I'm about to finish up planning my 2026. I can't believe we're already there, but I'm already planning my 2026 schedule, and I can do my entire year based on some form of the maps, needs and values, Enneagram, real life process. Even what Teresa has talked about on the podcast before, of the plant, tend, and prune, asking people on a regular basis to pay attention to what is God calling you to plant and to tend and to prune. I was going to tell you that my women's ministry theme verse is Luke 2:52, which is Jesus grew in wisdom, stature, and favor of God and man. That he grew as a fully human man in all of those areas and as fully God. All of the tools fall into one of those areas and help people to grow spiritually and emotionally.
It is beautiful to see how you've taken it into the ministry space, which, to be honest, is where it originally came from. Even for me and my personal story, I was doing all of this formational work for my own self while I was still on staff at a church. And much like you, I see that need. As many times we sit with Bible studies and we sit with fellowship and we sit with all these things, there's a longing in people for application into their own story and their own selves, because they're not always living life out here, not in their being. They're living it out there somewhere. And we hear a lot of messages of self-sacrifice, do for others, our families, our church, community, all of that. And yet we don't know where we're doing it from. And so the way you're taking the process and really integrating it into the lives of people, into their being, into that internal work, is such a gift of how you see it and map it all out and then say, oh, I can use this resource and all of these things. Thank you for leaning into the care of the women that you're surrounding with. I know that you have continued on the journey, not through just our tools, but through other things as well that you're bringing in. But, you mentioned those three centers that you look at, head, the heart, and the body. We talk about them all the time on the podcast, the three centers of intelligence. How do you incorporate those into the ministry that you're doing?
I just want our women to grow not only in wisdom of the Bible, which is important, but I want them to grow emotionally. I want them to be aware of what they're thinking. I want them to be just to understand that they do have a head and a body. Oftentimes we get stuck in one of those spaces and we live solely out of that. And it's just giving them a new language and an understanding of themselves that they've never been exposed to, I don't think. So it's so much fun, but it's so important.
Yeah. There's so much that you pour out in the space of ministry, whether it's in the church walls or you're going out in the community. And so, Elizabeth, as you think about what keeps you grounded to really live from rest, not rush, in the midst of the abundance of ministry, what are some of the things that help you to stay grounded?
This is going to kind of sound a little wonky, but I have a practice of stepping out into my backyard in my bare feet every morning and every night. And I watch the sun rise and thank God for the new day and his new mercies, and am silent and alone with Jesus at that time. And that absolutely keeps me grounded. And then in the evenings, I get to look into the stars and into the sky and say, thank you, God, for this day and for your creation. Practicing things like the daily office keeps me grounded. And then I've got to circle back to the people of Real Life Process, the coaches, the friendships that I've developed, and the maturity that they offer to me, spiritually and just otherwise. That helps me stay grounded. Obviously, things like spending time in the Word and prayer,
Yeah.
but yeah, community.
That community piece. And I don't know that people often name that as a spiritual practice. I do for my own
Mm.
self. It's, who are the people? We talk about this even in the process of the people that are life giving.
Right.
And I think in ministry, especially, at least in my experience and others such as yourself, many times when you're in the body, in the local community, and you are more in that leadership position, you don't have an outside source or an outside community because they are your community. And yet there's only certain things, for new ideas, for sharing personally, for getting up on the balcony of your own life and thinking and processing. That is something that I know so many pastors and leaders in church crave and long for. And for you to name that, that's actually part of your spiritual practice, is to surround yourselves, but yet you've developed this deep circle of trust there.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
being able to take the things outside of the ministry and talk to other coaches and other people in ministry within the Life Process has been so helpful, so life-giving.
Well, and you're really embodying, Elizabeth, as you were sharing even your practices. And thank you for sharing that, even going out and standing in your grass. It's a very physical act in the body. And then you were talking about, even the community connection, which is a very heart focused, I'm connecting with others. And then also just being in the Word and that wisdom that comes from knowing God's Word. And so you're embodying it whole self. And it's really beautiful just to witness
Yeah.
that in you.
Thank you.
And it's not woo woo. I know when we sometimes say, I'm going to take off my shoes and stand, that's actually scriptural. I'm
That's-
standing on holy ground.
that's
I'm
right.
taking off my shoes, my sandals,
That's
and
right.
standing. So it's not woo woo, but there is something about nature and being outside in of it that for us to name it, and we're all naming it because we all know it, it is important to say God's creation is the greatest invitation to know him at a knowing that is deep. So I honor your practice of no shoes, and you live in Texas, so you can get by with it a little bit more than
That's right.
we can here in the Midwest. That's for sure. I so appreciate just watching your journey. Erica and I have both had the privilege of watching kind of a full circle happen with you since 2019, when we sat in the living room way too late at night. And one of my greatest memories, just to give you the authentic, real picture, is being at the ranch one time at retreat. That's a place that Cameron and Elizabeth have felt is just a holy space. And it really is. It's a cabin that they have on their ranch in Texas near Waco, where they built knowing that retreats would be held there, that people would gather there. But one of my favorite was late at night, one night after our retreat people had left, there was a basketball game on. And Erica went and got her sweatshirt on, and Cameron and Elizabeth. And I have never seen people be more all in than that moment. Like nobody is sitting, everybody is standing. But it was the most fun community time of y'all cheering it on. That's probably when Erica really leaned into becoming a Baylor fan. And we had to be done in time for the game to take place. And I absolutely love that about you and Cameron. I've gotten to see you two model your marriage together and your fun together, just as how you're both wired and how much you take in things like going to the Sphere in Vegas and your concert people, and you're just crazy fun people to be with. And Erica and I've got to experience that. And you actually bring out a whole nother side of Erica when you're going to that place. So it's so much fun to see that happen.
Well, it is fun. And I love sports, and I love Erica that she loves sports. And she is an Baylor alumni by choice, even though
Yeah.
she's not, that's not her true love. We all know that, but she's always welcome to cheer on the Bears with us.
It brings joy, right?
That's right.
Yes. Yes.
For our Baylor listeners, there's a whole
That's
new
right.
little-
So if you're a Baylor
so.
fan, you can let us know, because that is where Elizabeth hangs. And she literally doesn't live far from there. As we wrap up today, I just hope you find joy in saying, wow, there is a place inside of my church, inside of the walls, that even if you've been in a place where, like the three of us, you've served in ministry in the past, you may hear a thread in your story that says, you know, I've even had some wounds in the church space. I've even had some things that have happened. All three of us could share those stories.
Yep.
And yet the church is made up of imperfect people. What is coming up for you as maybe someone who's serving in the church, or someone who's outside the church, volunteering and coming in, of what would you like to see in your local community? All three of us believe dearly in the local body of Christ. And we know there's a lot out there in the online world and a lot of places we can get fed and get nourished. But there is something powerful about sitting in the room, whether that be a living room or around a table, and sharing stories and work and deep work. So if you feel that, reach out. We'll have a conversation with you about what that looks like, to use tools like this, whether you're already a spiritual director or coach or on a lay ministry team or whatever that might be. We can share some links in our show notes for how you can get in touch with her if you just want to have a conversation. So check out our show notes, and that's where they'll be. You can also connect with Erica and I. Two of the best places are in our Circle community, which is a private platform we have online. You just go to therealifeprocess.com, click on community. You can join that community, message Erica and I, either one, if you want to have further conversations as well. Erica, anything else as we wrap up?
It's just gratitude from my heart. So thank you, Elizabeth, for sharing your story and just what God's doing in and through you. And it's a joy to be on the journey.
That it is. And remember that every ordinary day, when Elizabeth steps out at the end of the day and stands on the ground and looks up in the stars, every ordinary day has an extraordinary moment. You just have to look for them. That's part of formation, is seeing God in the everyday, ordinary things. And so we invite you to that. Don't miss those moments. Have a great week, everyone.